folks rolling in, but I think we have enough to get started now. I want to call the meeting to order, and I'll take the roll. Alsop? Here. Dotson? Here. England? Here. Fisher? Futel? Here. Hobson? Hopkins? Here. Hutchins? Cameras is here. Perkins? San Regret? Here. Tate? Westheimer. Gotcha. Nice timing.
May I add that Christine Fisher is an excused absence. She notified us that she had when the date change occurred, that she had a meeting out of town. Okay.
Got it.
Meeting out of town.
And I appreciate everyone being flexible with the scheduling and us scheduling this on later notice. Thanks everyone for working with us on that. I'd like to begin the meeting just with a brief moment of silence in memory of Dr. Owens. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the review and approval of minutes for the October 25th, 2002 meeting. Does anyone have any suggested edits, changes, revisions for that?
I'm going to defer to Marcia.
Terry has one.
My name is left down as the roll call vote. On page 3.
Okay, we'll get that changed. Any other suggested changes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes with Terry's one edit?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda, item 3, discussion of board member vacancies. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Alsop, Chair of the Governance Committee, to lead this discussion.
Thank you, Micah. I want to start by saying this is one of the hardest things that I've done recently, but I hope that it will go smoothly. We have a vacancy created in the chair position with the passing of Dr. Odell Owens, and so he would want us to keep it moving, so to speak. And the Governance Committee had a meeting last Tuesday, and the recommendation of the Governance Committee is that Micah Camrus be appointed the chair until our election, our normal election at the annual meeting in September. So I would like to make a motion to appoint Micah Camrus, the chairperson of the Cincinnati Preschool Promise, effective with the approval of that vote until our annual meeting. Any questions? Okay, I have one other comment, please. We do not have provisions in our current governance policies for these two actions, and we are going to be bringing some revisions to the board as early as our January meeting, if not our March meeting, which would cover filling of vacancies in those leadership positions, should they occur for sickness, death, or whatever. So I wanted to make that clear, that we were acting on what seemed logical to us in this appointment process.
I have a question. I should know this, but I don't. When we incorporate,
Or just touch it. That's working. Okay.
Yes.
When we became a 501c3, did we switch from calling these governance principles to bylaws, or is that something that we should do? It feels like we called them governance principles before we were an independent organization.
I'm going to defer to Jacob on that because we have a couple of different documents, but the governance principles govern the actions of this board.
Yeah, these effectively serve as the bylaws. They're by a different name. If you want, we could certainly rename them. In Ohio, they're typically called Code of Regulations or bylaws. We have an operating agreement and governance principles, which I believe was intended at the time to mirror what the United Way did for no other purpose than it was a good starting point.
Yeah, so
I don't have a strong opinion on, I just want to make sure that it's appropriate for our type of organization, just the name, because they function that way.
And we can discuss that at our next quote-unquote governance committee meeting, as we discuss, how we should proceed in, if we needed to replace the chair, the secretary, or the treasurer before an election.
I'll make note and add it to the agenda for governance committee.
So currently, Micah is the board secretary. That, before we vote on that, I just wanted to highlight the fact that I'm going to make another recommendation. So there is a motion and a second on the floor. No, not
Oh.
yet.
Mike has to call the vote.
Well, you're going to run it, right?
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. The next recommendation is, from the Governance Committee, is to recommend that Marcia Futel become the board secretary effective with the approval of the motion until our election in September of 2023. So I make that motion. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. At this point, I will gladly turn the meeting back over to Micah Cameras.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for the trust you're placing in me, and I'll do my best. Next on the agenda is the board committee assignments. There is only one change from where we've been, which is making me the chair of the executive committee and pulling me off the governance committee. Other than that, they remain unchanged from where we were. And we need to have those approved, so I'd like a motion to approve that change. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? All opposed? Okay.
I'm going to abstain because I don't like that. As the chair of the governance committee. No, I'm just
Your
kidding.
abstention is noted.
Yes, please note that.
All right, thank you. Next, the fifth item on our agenda is tributes to Dr. Owens. There are kind of two parts to this. First, I want to invite Shara to speak about what the organization already has done and will continue to be doing to pay tribute to Dr. Owens, and then also have a short kind of comment about what I think would be great for our board to be doing as we move into the future on that. But Shara, we'll start with you.
Thank you. On the day that Dr. Owens passed on Wednesday, we put a brief notification on all our social media sites and our websites. Subsequent to that, prior to services on Friday, we also prepared a formal statement on behalf of the staff and board, posted that on social media and circulated it through appropriate media outlets who were inquiring about those statements, comparable to what other organizations did as well. We sent our condolences and a small gift to Morgan last week, and this afternoon, another small flower arrangement was delivered to the family home on behalf of the staff and board of the Cincinnati Preschool Promise. On Friday, on our social media as well, we also had a small slideshow of some photos of Dr. Owens in action at the Preschool Promise and our board meetings. And if you haven't seen it, just check our social media site, and it begins with, let's see, if I can make this work, the picture, last photo that he took at our annual meeting when we had the photo opportunity. So that is what we've done to date. We have had several inquiries from organizations and individuals wanting to make contributions because the family that requested it in lieu of flowers, that contributions be made to Preschool Promise in addition to other organizations. One of those has been the Academy of Medicine, who made a significant gift of $5,000 from their foundation, and has asked for opportunities to do others. We are very prepared on our website following this meeting in the direction of the board to have that be front and center for people that want to do that as appropriate on our website, keeping those funds restricted for very specific purposes. And I had a long conversation with Christopher Owens, Dr. Owens' oldest son, on Saturday night, who assured me that that was the family's wishes, that those contributions will coming in, being directed to that. I inquired as to what the family's preferences may be as to how those funds are used, and a willingness to coordinate that with him. And he said at this point, we trust that the Preschool Promise would use those in the way that Dr. Owens would think was most appropriate. But I did assure him that before any of those funds were expended, it would be a conversation both with the board and inquiry as to which the family's wishes would be on how those are spent. So to date, that's what we've done.
Thank you, and I know it's been a lot of pivoting and moving quickly, and thanks for all of the work on that. Second part of this is, I do feel it's important for our board at the right time and the right place to continue to have discussions of what we can do to honor Dr. Owens. And I've asked Terry if the Community Engagement Committee could be the place for that as we move through the next few weeks and months. Terry has agreed to be the leader of that discussion and to host that in that committee. So we will certainly keep everyone posted of when those discussions will be ongoing. But as you have thoughts on that, Terry is the go-to person to share those with.
I have a question, please. Is there something, and I'm not a social media person, forgive me for that vulgarity, but is there somewhere that it's noted if, in lieu of flowers, if you would like to contribute to Preschool Promise, Dr. Owens' favorite charity, is that somewhere in writing, or is this just conversations?
It is on the J. Patterson Funeral Home obituary and statement of services.
Okay.
A list of the Preschool Promise it's on the funeral home site, along with the listing of not only Preschool Promise, Salvation Army, Free Store Food Bank, as well as CAT. We were not going to make that shift until we actually saw that in print and confirmed it with the family. If you go to the website and look for the listing of the obituary, and along with the links, it is also that statement.
Okay. Because I was
immediately after the
asked
photo.
about that.
Yes, I will be happy to send everybody the link to that, the updated link.
That
has
would be
language
very
as well.
helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, next we'll move to the Executive Director's Report. Shara.
Yeah, a report back. Here we go. I'm going to get this down by the end of the meeting. You all have a one-page handout, as we do normally, of our tuition assistance enrollment. You can see that our numbers right now are at 795 approved total. We are tracking significantly behind where we've been last year, but also a large number of applications that have been processed, also about a little over 1,000. We will continue to process those. I don't anticipate a significant increase in enrollment numbers will come until March as we start to prepare for extended learning session. That's when we peak again. We're doing an analysis now to bring to you in January why we think those numbers shifted. One thing that we know is when we heard from CPS at our last meeting, how their numbers have significantly increased, and it looks like we flip-flopped exactly. So now our numbers are in the 700s this year, and their numbers are in the 900s this year. We'll continue to track that and be informed on that data. You'll also see there's a significant number that we believe that are in excess of their funding. While there are only 14 that show up on this enrollment sheet, we know that there are a significant number that may not have even been processed once ODJFS decided to waive the copay requirement, because that was the only thing that they were getting from Preschool Promise. It is a lot of paperwork to complete if you know that that's the only means of support, and we don't have a firm handle on the number of students who may not have even submitted an application, knowing that that was the case. This will impact, again, as we start to talk about our goals, and that ambitious and aggressive goal that I said of a 20% increase, we know that it's unlikely that we'll reach that this year. So that's our enrollment numbers as it stands in terms. Sure, it's a handout that everyone got. That's the enrollment sheet. Sure. I apologize. It's that one special sheet. I always, we do it as a separate and a pullout and not in the regular information because this is not completely validated external information. It's our internal in process. So we always keep it separate and print it for you in a timely manner. And this is as of Friday. So. Personnel update, just to let you know, interviews are ongoing, lively interviews with potential candidates that Centennial Management has sourced for us for the deputy director. It is our intention to finalize before the end of the year. I'd hoped to come to this meeting and tell you all that a candidate had been secured. Not yet. Interviews are still in process, and we will keep you updated on that. You will also see on page 13 of your package, 15 of the packet, the preliminary summary of attendance data from Innovations that we also talked about at the last meeting, and the importance of us getting an attendance pilot up and going. At our January meeting, Innovations will be available to make a deep dive and a full presentation of this. This is top-line data to let you know what we had gathered already. You can see from figure 1 on the first page that overall 85.4% is our attendance rate. I don't want anybody to get excited about this because there are outliers, there's different distributions in that. We need to do a deep dive to really determine where we may have challenges, which sites we may have challenges, which groups of students we may have challenges with, whether those are 3s or 4s, with our goal to get everybody at a 90% attendance rate. So again, brief information for you just to assure you we are collecting the data and looking at it, additional questions and reports, and having Innovations in person to do the deep dive on that attendance information as we build the pilot program. You will also see as a separate handout in a large size, easier to read, as well as on pages 17 through 20 or 19 of your package, our 2022-2023 goals and objectives. We did not receive any comments, feedback, changes on what those goals are. This is the second read and the walkthrough of what those are. Again, are pretty confident in all these goals and strategies we've set out, with the exception of our preschool enrollment and tuition assistance numbers. We know that those are not going to meet that goal of 920 or the 20% increase. So I submit those goals and objectives for 2022 and 2023 for your review and approval.
Does anyone have any questions about those goals and objectives?
Why are we approving one that we know we can't meet?
Well, I guess that is up to you and your discretion, right? We agreed that the strategic plan would be what the strategic plan is. And if we can't meet the goals, and explaining why we can't meet the goals is a different conversation than changing the goals. Now, if the directive of the board is to change the goals to not meet that 20% in the strategic plan, I can absolutely offer a different number. But once we approve the strategic plan, I didn't feel comfortable independently changing what that number should be.
Do we have any thoughts on what the number should be, or should we just leave it as is and just tough it out?
I can tell you, looking at the number of where it is now, we're not going to gain more than 10% on that goal right now. So 800 is probably where we're going to level out. And the question again, it's a strategic question. Do we want to adjust the goal, or do we want to adjust the strategic plan to reflect that, or have explanations of why that goal wasn't met?
What do you think?
My comment is, I don't feel comfortable approving something we know we're not going to meet. I mean, that's not sitting well for me. I would prefer us to change it. If we're going to approve something, let's approve what we believe we can do.
Shar, does this need approval functionally for anything tonight?
It doesn't. It doesn't, because we're
Okay.
moving forward. And my question would be, is it that we want to change the approval for the metrics for this calendar year? Or do we want to revisit the strategic plan for the year over year and the 20% target? My recommendation would be to revisit the year-over-year 20% target overall for the strategic plan. Knowing what we know now and more information on access and reach that we've had, to be realistic about what those goals are. I can tell you the way that this is set up in the process for us now is that we are 6 months into the fiscal year when we are approving and looking at these goals and metrics. But also at the end of the year, we measure the success of the organization on these metrics, right? So we went to the point where normally, before we had approved this process and done it this way, I would come to you all in January and say, this is where we are in our goals, this is where we are in our budget, this is where we are halfway through the fiscal year. A little bit of this prediction is dependent upon actions that happen at the beginning of the year. I wish I could tell you a year in advance I could predict where enrollment was going to be and at that 20% number. Until we get traction and I see how the system's moving, it is almost impossible for me to give you foresight. And when we had strategic planning, you all said to me, isn't that an aggressive goal, right? Isn't that very ambitious to go to 20%? I said, yes, but I think we can do it. I was wrong.
Based on what we're hearing, do you all feel it would make more sense to discuss this at the January meeting when we have a little more data and to have a more thorough discussion then?
I hear Shara's suggestion that we leave it, but that we have a really good sense of what drove the enrollment this year so that we can adjust it for next year. And it will just show up as a bright red spot on some data or other, but we know we're in the process of assessing it for the future.
Or what I could do, can I suggest this as an alternative? Why don't I put a range of what that goal could be as to what I think is a achievable amount for this year, and range from that and what the strategic plan called for, or a level of what last year was. And if we have a range, that would make us feel more comfortable. What I don't want to do is not approve all of the other goals and get this process in motion for that one enrollment number.
I would feel more comfortable with that. I'm like Marcia. I do think it's important to stretch, but if we know that stretching is going to mean, no, we're not doing it. We're not going to hit it. So I'd feel more comfortable with that, a range.
Okay. So my commitment will be to come back at the January meeting based on the reach and access data and our current numbers with a range for that first metric that measures our first objective, which is increasing enrollment. Because the question is not about the goal and the objective, it's actually that one metric point among many of the key measures.
Will be an opportunity for some discussion outside of the meeting, because it sounds like our agenda for January is going to be pretty heavy if we got innovations coming. So is there a need to kind of discuss some of your views outside of the meeting and then come a little bit more informed at the meeting? Because otherwise we'll get bogged down in another conversation in January. I would love to see us like you get it moving, but I don't, if we are uncomfortable today, is there a sub, always with a subgroup, Mr. Chair, if there's a group of people that can talk through some of the challenges, help Shar kind of decide what needs to happen, and then come back with a recommendation, so that the board has had some involvement outside of the board meeting with you, so that meeting in January can be a little bit more flowing.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Maybe what we'll do is we'll approve tonight without that one, and then discuss that further in the executive committee, and then come back to the full board with that one when we're ready to do that.
I think that would be the appropriate place, because that way we can talk about how it impacts the overall strategic plan, as well as the metrics for this calendar year.
Any other comments? Okay, can I get a motion to approve that with the one goal that we've been discussing removed from that, with the understanding of future discussion there? Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that's approved.
I'll also call your attention, thank you, to the proposed meeting dates and schedule on page 9. You were also sent this via email. Tanya has also sent out Google Meet invitations to that, Google Calendar invitations for you to hold the dates for those upcoming meetings, to make sure that everybody is aware of those and has them on their calendar. The next agenda item is the Metrics IQ contract extension. I told you all that I would come back to you if we needed a further extension, and in fact, we do. We have rolled out the very substantial RFP. You will see on page 35 the details related to that RFP, and we needed to push back the date to make sure that we allowed ample time for all the vendors who may want to be able to bid on that contract to be able to do that. We will be having a bidders conference this Thursday, but because of the holiday, full and complete submissions for the RFP are not due until in January. When we get those in January, the review committee will then score the rubric as they've done in the past. That gives us time to identify the selected vendor and work on contract deliverables for you all to review and see at your March meeting. Because there was not a February meeting, that gives us more time for contract negotiation. That was necessary because this contract hasn't been bid out since we initially secured Metrics to provide this service. It is our customer contact and service hub that is doing that in eligibility for tuition assistance, eligibility for quality improvement, also eligibility for our teacher pilot. Not only verifying that eligibility, but also building out our new data warehouse components for QI so that we're able to have reporting on our QI side that tracks our goals and outcomes and efforts to outcomes comparable to what we have on the TA side as well. With that large body of work and those three significant components, as you can see, the RFP is posted on the website. I wanted to give it more time to do that rather than rush it, to make sure that we had the correct vendor. It is a significant investment of resources, time, and capacity to do this, so we extended the timeline to do that. That means the final contract will come back to you all for approval, as you see, on March 14th. And I
might understand that with the spinoff, the contract of Metrics is going to be lower, the bid is going to be lower?
It's probably going to be higher because there are more services that they're providing. So one is a one-time charge that will be for a build-out, right? That's the build-out that we've been discussing probably for 3 years that we haven't done on the QI side that allows us to track it, because now the QI tracking that we do is manual. It will also add a component that is Teacher Promise Grant and Staff Support Fund and an eligibility model similar to we have for approval of students and for providers, specifically because approval of those two sources, particularly Teacher Promise Grant, on a month-to-month basis to verify it, is an administrative function right now that takes almost 40% of an FTE for us to accomplish. It's not a good investment and wise use of resources. So having someone do an automated process for that, similar to what they do with the other things that we do, is what's planned in the scope of work.
I have a question, and maybe I wasn't paying attention. Did we cover engagement of auditor?
We haven't yet.
Okay, all right, because I have some questions about that.
We'll get to that
apologize, we
next.
skipped that.
Yeah,
I
we'll get back to
apologize.
that after we finish this.
So this is just to notify you, no additional action is needed from the board because you approved a contract that allows us to extend month to month. But I did make a commitment to notify you if we needed to extend that beyond December, and we do. And here's the plan for how it will work. Okay.
Any other questions?
How many companies are out there that do this work, and what will the competitive pool look like?
We know we have at least 3 local companies who have expressed interest in bidding.
Okay.
In looking at the national market that we participate in terms of, there's a national company that does RFPs that all play into that bid out. We know nationwide there are at least probably 4 to 5 other companies that have the capacity. Whether or not they're willing to meet our requirements of a local presence in Cincinnati, our equity rubric, and a willingness to go with the model that we've already developed rather than bid from scratch in a platform that uses sugar, because we're not willing to buy new licenses and rebuild that platform, is really the question.
Okay.
Any other questions on the Metrics contract extension? Okay, we'll move back to the engagement of auditor.
You will see here, beginning on page 20, on page 20 is our engagement of our auditors. As usual, this is our final year before the process starts to go out for the RFP for our new auditor. So this is similar to the agreement that we've done in previous years. Some minor changes to the agreement for changes in best practices and policies, but should look very similar to the engagement letter we've done in the past. And I'm open for questions.
I have a comment. I think we've had the current auditor 4 or 5 years, is that correct? Some organizations have policies about rotating, and we don't have that kind of policy. Is there a reason that we're bidding this out? I'm not, and I have some things I'm getting ready to say, so.
My understanding that was the initial term for the contract, based on best practices. We had planned for a certain number of years to have this as the auditor and do the shift. When we looked at all of the RFPs that needed to roll out, everything sort of expired as we carried over after the first 5 years of the levy, and keeping in mind best practices for a finite number of years auditors is why we chose to bid it out for next year.
Okay. A couple of points. I know you're waiting for these little bombshells. When we contracted with this very fine accounting firm, we set some parameters on what the amount would be that we would pay this contractor. And Hector, I need you to correct me. I believe those amounts went up after the first year. So I want to be sure that we're not getting into slippery slopes of, oh, I'm getting in there because it's a nonprofit, I want the business, I want the name. We need to be tighter than that, in my opinion. The other issue that I have is one around diversity, around our policies, around diversity, equity, and we need to take a look at that also this go-round. So those are my comments. And again, I think Clark, Schaefer, and Hackett is a very fine accounting firm, don't get me wrong. And in the business that I was in, I used them for 20 years. So, you know, I'm putting those issues out on the table for CPP. Yes, sir.
Just on the increase, the way that it was explained to the Finance Committee when the increases were approved, it had to do with the scope of what we were doing, right? We went from 2 programs to 5 or 6 programs, and the partner came in, discussed the issues, explained why they were requesting this. So on that issue, I wouldn't expect that now. We're a much more mature organization with a significant number of programs that we operate. It's clearly visible the direction we're headed versus 2017 when we were starting. So just to address that side of it, I think that's why it was done and why I wouldn't fear that whoever comes next, whether it's Clark, Schaefer, or someone else, would have that as a potential issue that would drive them to increase price.
Thanks, Hector, that's helpful.
And in terms of the equity lens that we look at things, with all of our RFPs, we have included language that we painstakingly drafted, thanks to Jacob with legal counsel, to make sure that we had a good statement of what our equity policy is, our expectations of compliance with that, also the revised equity policy with the rubric that shows how we'll be measuring that, as well as a reporting of progress and alignment with our equity policy when the report comes back to the board for renewal of the contract. So while it is a multi-year agreement where we don't anticipate rebidding it out, the contract extension is dependent upon board approval that the deliverables were met, that the cost is still on track for us to do, and one of those deliverables is compliance with our equity policy. So I'm happy to share the statement that we include in our RFPs, but it really is built very tightly on the equity policy that you all approved at the annual meeting.
Jake?
Are they cycling the lead auditor, the partner on the audit?
Hector, are you aware if there's like, I think they are, because I had a different,
Yeah, the lead partner, which is not a partnership, it's an LLC, so the lead shareholder, call it, has been the same throughout, but the person leading the actual work has changed.
Okay.
Throughout.
That may be an opportunity for this particular year too, for you to segue into the first meeting.
That's a big issue with many quote-unquote accounting firms.
yes. We will take special note and may do a call out for that and ask for some demonstration of that in the RFP a little bit more strongly, given that concern.
So like who's on the team?
Yes.
So they're currently, the RFP asks for their statement of diversity, how it's been implemented, and the composition of their team, based on our rubric to say, how do you work? What are your policies? What is your staffing? But also, what is your spend in outsourcing? So if you decide to bring in others, you subcontract, you spend for major policies. The current rubric asks you to make a statement of all of that, and has a valuation and a numerical point value on response to the RFP that is assessed.
And I think a key point that Hector raised, we're not in preschool anymore, even though we're the preschool promise. We are in high school now, the board is. So we have a different type of lens, and I think that's very important. You can say anything in a statement, but you got to walk the talk.
Thanks for that. Any other questions or comments? All right, we'll next move to item 8 on the agenda, committee reports. First is finance and audit with Tony.
Okay, we have actual reports for September of 2022.
Just push that button.
Okay, we have actual results through as of September 30, 2022. You'll see that we are well under budget in almost all categories. We have a slight over in facilities. There is a detailed listing of the causes behind the variance from budget. The biggest number on the page being the number of students enrolled in tuition assistance. We had also a slight under enrollment in the extended learning. There's some timing issues that are of less economic impact, and they will come closer with the timing issues as they right themselves. We also, and this is the second part of the agenda for the committee here, we report out on the use of, what do we call it? We call it the unspent carryover spending plan. And if I have this right, and I'll ask for affirmation maybe from Hector, that is the second group of detail on the sheet with the financial report. And we have approved Shara's plan for that spend, the unspent funds policy. We are at a level where the education committee, I gotta get this right, the education committee, or not education committee, the finance committee reviews this plan and submits it. And is this now subject to any further approval, or is that
Yes.
It was an advisory review.
an advisory review?
And then
Okay.
the board
Approves.
approves.
For the board to approve. And so, and is that for this evening? It doesn't say for this, is that for this evening? Will we get that approved this evening? Okay. And so that will be the second table where labeled Key Additions to Budget Fiscal Year '23, adjusted from carryover adjustments from fiscal year '22. We reviewed this plan. Char had prepared this, and we reviewed it in committee. You can see the various places that we feel we can make a difference with those funds. And I think rather than me read them out, we should all read through these. I think they're targeted for the goals in the strategic plan that we're trying to achieve. I would refer any specific questions to Shara, because after all, it's her plan. But we did go through this, and it did make a lot of sense how we can target some important areas with the use of these carryover funds.
So Tony, the Finance Committee has reviewed it and blessed it and now seeking our final approval?
Correct. And we have a policy, a written policy on unspent funds, and it is laddered depending on how much unspent funds we have to deal with the level that we're at here, which was just right at about 500,000. The policy says that we review it in finance and bring it forth to the board for final approval. And that's where we are. I think the year-to-date summaries, are speak for themselves, and there's really not a whole lot of comment there. The more interesting part is what Shara can accomplish with the unspent funds.
Does anyone have any questions or comments about that? Hector, do you have something you want to say too?
Just one item to be technical. Every member of the Finance and Audit Committee has reviewed it, but we were unable to get a quorum at the meeting. Therefore, on technical grounds, the Finance and Audit has not voted, even though there was no vote to be had. But every committee member has seen it.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yes.
Sally?
I think it's a great plan. Kudos. My question is, do we have a time limit on spending these funds? And do you think that if we do, if it's this fiscal year, do you think we have enough time to spend these resources, to get things up and running?
So my read of the policy was not that there was a time limit on when they could be expended. There was a time limit in walking through the policy in which we had to have budget approval of how these items would be allocated. Correct me if I'm wrong, Hector. This is our first time doing this, right?
I think the way that it's written, it gets added to the budget for this year. So then what happens is when we go to do the next analysis at the end of fiscal year '23, it would automatically be added to that budget number. And then we do another calculation of, is it unspent or carryover funds?
Right.
I say we approve it.
What's the downside of not approving this?
We couldn't spend the money if we didn't approve it.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Has CPS blessed this, or do we care?
It is not a requirement in the carryover spend policy that CPS bless it.
Okay.
Yeah, Deborah, at this level, we are given authority to determine how to spend it. I would say the downside would be some really interesting programs that we would not be able to kick into high gear.
That was my question. The reality of being able to really put it into high gear, do you have enough time? You said we already halfway through. Will it give you enough time to get traction and at least get some seed in the ground to really kind of get the response that you're looking for?
Yes, I think for some of these programs, we've already initiated and start to initiate. I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Hector, first time doing this, the technical flow, right, of what the policy says is, if the board does not approve it, it gets treated as other carryover funds have done in the past, which means it gets returned to CPS.
Oh, well, we're not doing that.
I'll take that as a motion. Is there a motion to approve
I
it?
had a
Is there a second?
Before you vote, I just had a more technical
Sure.
question probably for Tony or Hector. So we're going to approve this, I'm sure. When we see this, will those numbers that are allocated in the different buckets, are they going to get rolled up into the top part of this, or will we always see it? Oh, I see it. Never mind. Never mind. I'm good.
All right,
Thank you.
it's been moved and seconded. I'm going to call the question. All in favor of approval?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, it is approved. Tony, anything else from the Finance and Audit Committee?
Thus ends our report.
All right, next to the Governance Committee, to Deb.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm asking, what I'm saying to you all. I'm going to ask Shara and Tanya to give the update.
We are happy to do that. As far as I know, we have annual disclosure statements from everyone but one, right? We have sent those over to Jake for review, and as of yet have gotten no conflicts reported back that we need to consider or weigh.
Is the person in this room?
No, they are not.
Okay, well, we'll figure that out.
And it has been calendared for a discussion item at the next governance
Okay,
committee
thank
meeting.
you.
So we wanted to offer some assurances that we have
It's not me.
no disclosures or potential conflicts that need to be discussed or considered at this point.
Thank you.
All right, cost of quality, Sally.
Yeah, we had a good meeting, I think, just last week, and a couple of highlights.
Sally, I think your mic.
A couple of highlights from the meeting. One is we strongly support the idea of blended funding to make sure that our providers have as many resources as they can, and we sort of worked out how to do that. We spent some time talking about what are the barriers and current challenges to staffing up. And it was a very robust discussion, and we got great information from particularly the providers about some of their challenges. We didn't feel good about their challenges because they're extensive. I mean, there's not a day that you look at the news that you don't hear of an industry that is short of employees and has a hard time recruiting. But it seems particularly acute for our business, and so we spent a lot of time talking about what to do about that. Shara is working with the other local preschool initiatives, and I was very surprised to hear that there are 8 of them around the state of Ohio, and they're talking about some ways to go together for some benefits or back office services or other kinds of things that we can get some economies of scale by going across Ohio. We also talked about some of the initiatives that are underway, the Career Navigator that 4C has launched, that we are providing a portion of the funding, and how that is getting off the ground, and then our work with Cincinnati State. So I mostly, we did, maybe, I don't know if we spent time, but we made it clear that for the first number of years of the Cost of Quality Committee, it was all about teacher wages. And while that is probably the most critical factor in determining what high-quality preschool costs, we are now being more literal of the name of our committee. We're trying to look at other factors, all the factors that go into what high-quality preschool costs. And in fact, Shar is working with a number of people a number of people to really go back to the drawing board to say, what does high-quality preschool cost in our community with community-based programs? And I think that is so essential because we're nibbling around the edges with some of the things we're addressing. And if we really knew what high-quality costs, what it takes to deliver the kind of preschool that gets kids growing and learning and ready for the future, we could look at this issue in a more holistic way, rather than saying, should we give providers $200 extra or 500 extra? That's like important, but it's not the big picture. And that's really where the committee wants to focus is, what are the details, but what are we going to do? What do we need to do to address the true cost of quality?
Sally, can you speak to the innovation or creativity that the programs are looking at in terms of recruiting or qualified staff? Because I don't think we can begin to talk about quality unless we can get the qualified staff in the classroom that clearly understand the whole developmental stages of everything to do with children. So when I hear that they are working with Cincinnati State, we've been doing that for years, centuries and centuries and centuries, and not just Cincinnati State, all of the institution that does have an early education program, but still we're not able to, the creativity of recruiting individuals to get them to the point to get into those programs.
Right, you're totally right. I think what we walked away with, and it's a fairly small group, but I think what we walked away with is that there is no silver bullet. So every one of these efforts needs to be tried. And there are only a couple of providers there, so we didn't hear, tons of things that people are trying, but there's not going to be one answer, and so we did not come away with, oh gosh, we never thought of recruiting that way or getting people into school this way. No, there were no answers. There were only challenges. Mm-hmm. Shar, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is, I can tell you kind of the flow and streams of where that creativity may be coming from, right? First of, we heard with the Career Navigator model that 4C shared with us, real time, how they were making adaptations and changes to that program versus the way it was originally designed, right? And so that's real-time local changes that are based on the data that we have of how that's being updated. We also know that Cincinnati State is regularly tweaking their program. Our piece in that is just the funding on the end, not the program development, but the monetary incentive. The two things that are still outstanding is I think the RFP process has closed for the funding that Hamilton County has devoted to doing their talent pipeline exploration, and that was almost $1.8 million. So we hope to see some creativity come from that, depending on who will be implementing that. Comparably, there's a similar package for talent pipeline of $1 million for the city, and the vendor has not been selected for that yet. So all that is to say that no, we don't know, but lots of irons in the fire. We're also taking guidance and in lockstep with the Children's Funding Project and how they're doing that on a national level and who may find innovation, as well as the Hunt Institute, who does a quarterly update and webinar for best practices in the community, or I guess we're not supposed to say best practices, promising and effective practices on how that may be working. But I can tell you overall, it is a system frustration. We have incremental progress, but nothing that says wide scale, 20 people, 30 people. We are grateful for the 2 or 3 that each initiative is able to initiate at a time, but open to ideas. We are willing to try anything.
So is it possible to look at this issue the way we do with fighting violence? When the violence is, when we're dealing with the violence, we're police department come with a strategy on how they're going to deal with the violence by increasing the number of police officers. While they're recruiting police officers, the violence is still going on. So they've had to find a way to use what they have while they find new recruits and still maintain control of the violence in our city. So is there a way for us to get enough insight on the way things are happening with our teachers that we can fight it, put the fires out that we can put out, but also be recruiting new firefighters here to step in when the firefighters who've been fighting this get tired? Because what I see happening is we're gonna burn out, and there's no new recruits online to kind of fill in this work from a cost of quality. I know we can't do a whole lot inside the centers, but from the centralized work that we're doing, who are the new recruits that's gonna help with this?
So I think what you described is our challenge in having an immediate strategy, midterm strategy, and long-term strategy. What we've been talking about a lot are long-term strategies that we're engaged in terms of projects with organizations and institutions. When we look at the 4C project and career navigators and the work that we're doing, those are some short-term solutions when it is a months trajectory where you have new early childhood educators in the system that have processed through that. At the same time, there are some things that are somewhat out of our control that are, maintaining the system now that we've seen changes in terms of changing class size, changing qualifications of teachers that I'm not so sure supports quality, but may laxing in regulation and those other things. So I just want us to be cautious in how we're doing that. But none of the things that we're attempting is only a long-term strategy, right? We are doing both. Anything from leading men's fellow who are starting with reaching high school graduates to say, how do we get you working now? Those are gentlemen who are going to work every day at a childcare preschool site while at the same time advancing their education and being in the pipeline as well. There is a move that we heard from one of our partners to say people who didn't return to employment after the pandemic, people who worked for us for a year but quit. How do we get and reach back to those? They've had traction of about 10 to 18% in getting those particular employees back. So all of those mechanisms are going on, and Preschool Promise has taken the approach on how do we support that, not how do we drive it. Because there are experts in the field like 4C and others who are doing that. How do we come in and support that? The direct information that we get, like you're talking about from teachers, comes from our monthly check-in with our Teacher Promise Grant recipients on what's happening in the field and the quarterly reports required of those that receive staff support funds.
And that piece I know we have, but I'm really not referring to the teachers. I'm referring to the mechanics of cost of quality, raising the issue and keeping the volume of our voice strong as we rotate out from midterm to long-term policy. So part of that you have down pat. The piece that I'm concerned about is the short-term rotation. We're in a championship game, the players can't stay in the whole game, so how are we rotating out to give the champions some time to rest, but not lose traction? So who's holding the toe in the road while we're doing that? That's what I'm looking for. I know it may not be answered in this meeting today, but that's what I hear is that somebody's got to hold the rope. You may not be able to pull it, but hold it until the next group gets in. And for me, I think that's where Ms. Michelle comes in. Because the press, the communication, that piece is really where we hype it up. And I know we got our social media tracking, but I think that's the piece where we're missing news coverage, out of the box kind of conversations, while people are settled right now to get people back on board why it's so important to do preschool.
Any other questions or comments for Sally? Okay. Number 9 on our agenda is the approval of executive director's compensation for December 1, 2022 through November 30, 2023. I'll share with all of you that following our October meeting, where we conducted our discussion about the evaluation of the executive director, Dr. Owens and I met with Shara and delivered the board's comments and feedback and gratitude for a great year. And that we have her as our leader, and shared with her the discussions from our board and the recommendation about compensation for the upcoming year. You'll see that as the final page in the packet. If everyone wants to take a moment to review it, you'll see it mirrors the discussion we had at the end of the October meeting. And take a moment to review it, and once everyone's had a moment to review that, unless there are any questions or comments, I'll ask for approval on that. Any questions or comments?
Will this decision, Mr. Chair, be retroactive to the December 1st date that we have?
I think there's a way to solve for that. Is that?
Yes.
Yes. Good question.
So you're making the motion.
I'm asking for someone to move we approve this, the final page
I
in the
make the
packet.
motion to approve executive compensation retroactive to December 1st, 2022 through November 30th, 2023. The 2022-2023 base salary increase for the CPP executive director would be an increase of $7,500 on the current base of $157,500, bringing the base salary up to $165,000 in recognition of outstanding performance, and a one-time performance bonus. That bonus would be $10,000 to be paid in a lump sum as of December 1st, 2022.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's approved. I think the final item on our agenda is observers' comments. Observers, Vera, do you have any comments?
Very effective, a wonderful meeting, and wish everyone a safe, happy, healthy holidays.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for bearing with me through my first one. Our next meeting is January 31. Looking forward to seeing everyone then. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.